Hey everybody, how's it going? Just wanted to touch base really quickly as far as your work on Module 2. Again, really nice job. I love the discussion. Wonderful job on the guided notes. That's all going great. I wanted to weigh in just a little bit on that distinction between a topography-based definition and a function-based definition. First and foremost, I want to make sure that I'm not discouraging anyone from really thinking about why somebody does something. As many of you have already grasped, and we'll certainly get into more in depth as this class goes along and in future classes, really answering that question of why somebody's doing the things that he or she is doing is of critical importance, right? That's going to drive all of our interventions. It's huge. So I love that you're asking those questions. I love that you're incorporating that information into your definitions. But when we're talking about a function-based definition, there's a subtle distinction there between thinking about the function of behavior and a function-based definition. So I'm looking at Cooper starting on page 65, where they really start to delve into the two types of target behavior definitions. And so on page 65, Cooper talks about a function-based definition designates responses as members of the targeted response class solely by their common effect on the environment. And they give a number of examples there. One that they talk about, this very first one right on the bottom of page 65, talking about defining children's offers to play with peers in terms of specific things that children say and do might omit responses to which peers respond with reciprocal play, etc. So let's boil that down into terms that we can really talk about and grab hold of, right? If you try to define play bids topographically, right? And then you've got to get into exactly what the student might say, right? Exactly, it might be anytime the student says, hello, hi, how are you? Do you want to play with me? You have to list out every single one of those things for it to be a topography-based definition because it's going to be what it looks like. Whereas with a function-based definition, you can say any vocal behavior that results in a response from a peer, okay? So that accounts for the possibility that a child might say, what's up? Or hey, and that's it, right? And still get a response from a peer that we would consider a social bid most likely, right? But if we're going with a topography-based definition, we can only consider all those specific words that we put in there. And it's going to be virtually impossible, right, to account for every possible way that a student could make a social bid. So that's where that function base, it's about doing things that make someone else say hello, right? So we can get into, if we think about it, we can get into what might the function of that behavior be. We can get into thinking that it might be about attention from peers, right? But that's not what's critical about the definition. What's critical about is what's the immediate outcome in the environment from having engaged in that response, okay? Another example that they give is the football players. This is on page 66, right? And they talk about rather than getting into what's involved in making a proper form tackle, right, or what good tackling looks like in a football game, it's did you get the other guy on the ground, right? So that's function. The function is the other person's on the ground, right? If we wanted to think about function in that case in terms of why someone wants to get the other player on the ground, maybe again it's for the praise of the coach or the cheers of the fans or whatever it might be. But the bottom line from a function-based definition is any action that results in the ball carrier being on the ground, okay? That's our function-based definition. And then Cooper gets into on page 66 talking about topography-based definitions and says that a topography-based definition identifies instances of the target behavior by the shape or form of the behavior, and talks about using them when you don't have any direct, reliable, or easy access to the functional outcome, or when you can't rely on the function because you don't always get the same results. And they give the example of trying to define a behavior of a proper golf swing, right? For those of you that play golf or have seen other people play golf, it's funny, sometimes you can have the most atrocious swing in the world and the ball ends up going where you want it to go. And other times you can set up and have a swing that looks and feels really nice but doesn't get the job done. So Cooper's saying that might be a case where you want a topography-based definition. You want something that really describes what a good swing should look like regardless of where the ball ends up going, right? Because you would think that consistently over time, a good golf swing results in more consistent good results, even though sometimes a good swing gives you bad results, a bad swing gives you good results, okay? So one way that we might think about this is, let's say that we've got a target behavior of instigating. Okay, someone instigating, and we think about what might be involved in that, right? For a given student, if we think about, first of all, from just in layman's terms, what instigating might be, right? It's doing something that gets somebody else upset or riled up or annoyed. It might be swearing at them. It might be saying things about family members. It might be mocking them in some way. It might just be standing too close to them. There might be a whole bunch of different things, right? So if we're looking to define that from a topographical standpoint, right, we would want to list out all the different ways that someone might do something that we're going to characterize, or our student might do, that we're going to characterize as instigating, right? So it might be anytime so-and-so swears at somebody else, or calls somebody else a name, or makes fun of somebody else's clothes, or whatever the case may be, right? So that might be our topography-based definition. Where we can potentially run into trouble there is there might be something else that student's able to do that also gets somebody else riled up that isn't part of our definition, right? So it's going to be really difficult to account for all those possibilities. Now, if we slide over and think about it in terms of a function-based definition, right? We can say anytime student X engages in action Y that has the effect of making another student upset, right? So in theory, that accounts for a wider range of possible things that our student might do. So now let's think about the possible pitfall that we encounter with our function-based definition, okay? What happens if our student does something, says something really nasty, makes some kind of a comment, but the student they say it to has been working on their coping skills, right? And is able to sort of brush it off and not get agitated. With our function-based definition, that's no longer considered instigating, right? Because it didn't have the effect of getting that student riled up. So again, when we're really trying to tease these two out, it's about what it looks like, which is topography, or what effect it has on the environment, which is function, okay? Or sometimes we might have some that are a combination of the two, but that's really the distinction. It's what does it look like, or what effect does it have on the environment, okay? It's not necessarily, a function-based definition is not necessarily about the reason somebody's doing something. Again, that's important information, really important information as far as driving our interventions, but that's not going to be a critical component of our actual definition. It's also not going to be about the consequence that occurs as far as what the adults do to try to reduce that behavior, or what the behavior plan says, okay? It's just about what the immediate effect on the environment is of a student engaging in that behavior, okay? That's what we're really looking for when we talk about a function-based definition. One other thing, regardless of whether we're looking at topography-based or a function-based definition, remember when we're talking about whether something's behavior, this goes back to some of the early chapters, right? Think about the dead man's test, right? So if a dead man can do it, it's not behavior, right? So when we say that if we define non-compliance as not following directions, okay, we're starting to run into difficulty there, right? Because a dead man cannot follow directions just fine, right? So it fails that dead man's test. We have to, think about things that are defined by their actions, by what somebody is doing, okay? So that's, regardless of whether we're going topography or going function, we really want to make sure that we're actually, in our definition, we're grabbing onto actual behavior. Again, really nice job, everyone. And I hope that making this distinction clears that up a little bit for people. It's really tricky, and at the end of the day, what's really important is that we're able to come up with a nice, tight definition that different independent observers can agree whether they just saw the behavior or whether they didn't, okay? Because that's going to lead to more consistent data collection. It's going to lead to more consistent implementation of our interventions, which is really the whole rationale. You talk about the why. That's the why behind getting really good operational definitions. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to Module 3.